doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
So good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome on behalf of Africa Investor to the NDC Investment Summit and Awards 2022. My name is Dr. Hubert Danso, and I am the chair for today's summit, and a very warm welcome to you. Friends, we are gathered here today on the eve of COP27's Finance Day against some very unprecedented stark investment and green finance realities. There are three that I'm going to highlight. Firstly, Africa's need in terms of the investment opportunity of $3 trillion for nationally determined contributions by 2030 comes against the backdrop that Africa has only mobilized, the world has only mobilized $2.8 trillion US dollars in the last 20 years, and of that, Africa received just 2%. Secondly, the world governments, MDBs, global development finance institutions, and civil society organizations alike recognize there is no single pathway to net zero without the exponential increase of institutional assets being deployed for African projects and opportunities. And thirdly, there is absolutely no option or question that we need to urgently advance institutional investor-public partnerships and co-create and implement future-fit business models and platforms to make mobilizing private capital at scale for African NDCs the expectation and not the exception. At COP26, Africa Investor and the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank undertook to work with our advisory board members on a COP27 institutional investor consultation process to identify and prioritize investor-led capital mobilization, Scope 3, and just transition initiatives to present them during this COP here at COP27, our African COP. Our overarching goal at the heart of the consultations was to design and deliver greater public-private finance mandate alignment and more catalytic pathways that fast-track and scale private capital's participation in the continent's green transition, implemented through institutional investor-public partnerships such as the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank. As many of you know, the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank is an African Union-convened and supported African institutional investor-led global green finance platform to catalyze private finance for Africa's climate transition. As the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank, we recognize that our market on the continent for green finance is fragmented and lacks platforms to mobilize institutional capital at scale, and we were therefore established to be an investor in and manager of green infrastructure assets with a particular focus on co-developing and investing in both public and privately originated bankable African NDC projects. The African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank is really working to mobilize other private capital, crowding in additional finance with a careful attention not to displace private finance. As the largest consortium of African and global institutional investors focused on African climate investment opportunities, we are committed to building. We're committed to building and strengthening the African green infrastructure investment market and not simply serving it. So ladies and gentlemen, we have three core objectives for this summit being held today on the eve of COP27's Finance Day, which should in our view be a finance and investment day. But our three objectives are firstly to launch our asset owner-led proposals, initiatives and platforms addressing investor bottlenecks raised at COP26 to assist mobilize and de-risk private capital at scale to meet our $3 trillion worth of investment opportunities under our NDCs by 2030. The second core objective for today is to discuss and really generate recommendations on how institutional investors as universal owners can continue to provide leadership and solutions to support Africa's just energy transition, mobilize private capital at scale for African NDCs in support of the COP27 presidency and beyond. I think it's been stated very clearly that this COP should really be the COP of solutions. And then third and finally, our goal, one of our key goals for today is to promote African NDC investment success stories through the Africa Investor NDC Investment Awards, which will take place at the end of this particular summit. So in conclusion, I'd also like to thank our partners for their valuable support in making this summit possible: the African Union Development Agency, AUDA, the Continental Business Network, the International Chamber of Commerce, the African Green Infrastructure Investment Bank, the International Energy Agency, Deloitte, DLA Piper, Frost & Sullivan, Descartes, and the NDC Partnership. Specifically, I'd like to thank the NDC Partnership leadership, led very ably by Pablo Vieira, who is the Global Director, and Guli Sabahi, the Senior Advisor for Climate Finance, and especially its Africa team, led by Margaret Baharia, the Regional Manager, and her dynamic team. I'm told that she's not here, but she'll be on her way, but John Heeman is here. So with these brief welcome remarks, I just want to stand on protocol and ask you to give a very warm welcome and recognition to Her Excellency Nados Bekele Thomas. If we can give a round of applause for our dignitaries, please. And if we could also recognize the Right Honourable Raila Odinga, the African Union High Representative for Infrastructure Development.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.